Why did you do that? Why did you do that? And I couldn't convince him how sweet and precious I really am. But I wouldn't do it again, I promise you. We moved to Central Baptist Church in Florence after a stint back at the seminary where I got me an education. Boy, that was great. We like to starve to death. Moved to Central Baptist in Florence, and it's the only place where I've ever been where they loved me when I got out of the car. They truly did. There was no proving yourself. I spent 28 years with these folks, but they were heartbroken when I came here, and they loved me at arm's length for about 2 years because they were not going to get close to anybody else. But those people just wrapped us up and loved us. And I met some of the best people in the whole world. My training union director, Bill Elliott, used to sell cars at the Lincoln Mercury place. Good friend. He took pride in what we called back in those days training union. And he always wanted to give a report on Sunday night before preaching. And he enjoyed doing it. And he walked down to the front. He would always stand there. He was a big guy, kind of had a big belly. Put his hands in his pockets. And he'd go to talking, and he'd just walk back and forth. And he'd forgot to zip his britches up. And he'd make an emphasis, and he'd lean back, and when he'd do that, his britches would just open up and close. Women started getting up and leaving. People were laughing. He didn't know what was going on. He just kept on giving his report. And when he sat down, he asked his wife, "What's going on?" She said, "Zip up your britches." But I'll tell you something if you won't tell anybody. You might want to try it because it increased our attendance on Sunday night greatly. Greatly. People didn't want to miss it. They did some things for me quite often. Every year they would rent a couple of motorhomes, and the deacons would take me to the Sugar Bowl. And we had a good time. And every year at Christmas, they would have a party and invite Roz and myself to come. And they always gave me a gag gift. And they made me open it right there. And I can't tell you what was in all those boxes. Now, their wives were there. They weren't hiding it from anybody, but I'm not going to tell you what was in those boxes. But in one of them, there was a pair of women's bikini panties with Bama written across the rear end. When I got on the motorhome to go to the Sugar Bowl, I put those panties in my pocket. We stopped in Biloxi to get some lunch and just kill a little time before we got to New Orleans, and we were going in this mall to do a little walking around, and one of my men, I said, "Let me straighten your collar," and I folded his collar up, and I draped those bikini breeches across his back and turned his collar down. And he had people following him and laughing all over the mall. And he'd stop and try to figure out what was going on, and he'd look around, and he couldn't figure out what was happening, and he didn't know till he got back on the motorhome and took his jacket off, and the panties fell down on the floor. That's one blow for me, okay? Another one, we had about half of our deacons were white-neck deacons. And we had about half of them that were red-neck deacons. And white-neck deacons and red-neck deacons don't see things just alike. And we took a trip to Shaco Springs for a deacon's retreat. And all the redneck deacons and the preacher were up in the front of the van, and all the white-neck deacons were in the back of the van, and the redneck deacons had to chew a red man in a spit cup. And the white-neck deacons complained about it being a nasty, sorry habit and wishing that we would quit doing that. And we listened to that all the way down there. And when we started home, it started again. And we stopped to get some gas in Birmingham. And I took one of the styrofoam cups with me to the bathroom. And I filled it about half full of lukewarm water and took it back and put it between my feet. We start back out on the road, and they started again. Would y'all just quit? That's nasty. I said, if y'all don't shut up, I'm going to throw my spit cup on you. And they just kept it up. And I just took that cup of warm water and threw it back through the van. Turn the light on, turn the light on, They were gagging. They were wanting to see. They needed some help. They were suffering. And those people still love me. Because I'm not normal. And my abnormality, I promise you, you won't believe it when I say it, but my abnormality has more to get into a man's heart than it does doing what you think I ought to be doing. You can write that down. Well, I'm going to tell you one of the funniest things that ever happened. I'm having to keep up with this. What time did they tell y'all we're going to leave? Are y'all ready to go yet? Okay. When I got to Central, they told me that they had had something to happen that everybody just laughed about. Rick Singleton, who is the sheriff of Lauderdale County, who was the chief of police in Florence, who in his younger day was Rick Rivera, a professional wrestler. Be sure you ask him about that when you see him. His daddy, Junior Singleton, who was a brother to Muscle Shoals Aaron Singleton, was the barbecue man in Florence. And he was the caterer for the deacons and wives and ministers' Christmas dinner. And he had the standard barbecue, beans, everything. And they had a big feast on Saturday night. And on Sunday, between 11 and 12 o'clock, the dread disease of diarrhea hit the whole bunch. Every one of them. The beans were bad or something, but it hit them all during that worship service. People were taking up the offering and said, here, you take it, and running. Women were going out of the choir. My lady with she said, Brother Tom, there's 3 women put out a wash in the bathroom back there. I'm telling you, it was bad. And Brother Crow, Dr. Crow, who was a pastor, one lady said his poor knuckles were turning white. He was up there just holding on, trying to make it through his sermon, and finally he just left and took off himself. All of them with diarrhea. And I couldn't wait till I had a chance, and I called Richard Crow, a man who served as my associate pastor here in this church for a long time. dear friend of mine, I followed him, who was a pastor there before me. I said, I want you to tell me your side of this story. And he told me. And it was exactly like they had told me. But then this man who was impeccable, I would love to be like him. He said, Tom, that was the most moving service I've ever done. I hope something's moving y'all to give a good offering tonight. I can tell you that right now. While we were there, I created a lot of good friends. And by the way, I may be the only pastor that's ever left a church in this association, and the going away gift was a beautiful brass spittoon. Still got it at my house. I will go on and tell you it was full of money. But I had a love and relationship with those people that made it hard for me to come here. And when I came here, I came to a church that really didn't know how to laugh right then. So sad. I met with them privately. We met in Hollis Isbell's home. He was the chairman of the committee. I didn't want people knowing about it and word getting back to Florence. And the people on the committee were very gracious. Morris Mead, one of our older men, was on that committee. He's now with the Lord, he and Lady both. But he sat down by the fireplace and went sound asleep while we were meeting. I mean, sound asleep. We came to a decision that I would come and preach for this church in view of a call. They planned a day when I would come, and they wanted to work out a time when I could come that they could meet us, and if they had any questions they wanted to ask us. Y'all ought to try that sometime. That's just a lot of fun. They didn't want anything to come up that would become a problem because they had all the problems they needed. They just wanted it to be smooth. And so I came on Saturday night, and we had a good meal, and then they had the question time, and the committee was sitting up there at the table with us. And everything was going fine. It really was. And then Hollis introduced me so I could say anything I wanted to say. And I stood up and I said, I'm telling you right now, if I come to be the pastor of this church, there are going to be some changes made around here. And it got so quiet. And I looked at the pulpit search committee, and all the blood had run out of their faces. What is he doing? I said, go back there and look at that table. There's not a thing strawberry on that table. And if I come to be the pastor of this church, there better be something strawberry on that table every time we get together. And they did something they had not done in a while. They laughed. I will tell you that Hollis made me 2 promises. I told him I liked her. You cannot speak, Hollis, just sit back there. I told him I love to ride horses, and he had a horse barn, and he said, I got a barn full of horses. You can ride a horse anytime you want to ride a horse. And I told him I really loved peanuts. He said, I will keep you in peanuts. That's the 2 big things. 6 months later, the horse barn burned. A lot of the horses died in the fire. and I never saw the first peanut. Once you sign on the dotted line, man, it's done. I think he might have sicked Charles Trotter on me, though, because Charles Trotter would bring a big paper sack full of peanuts by my truck one time a year, open the door when nobody was around, and just throw them all inside my truck. And it'd take me 2 days to get all the peanuts out of my truck. But I found people here who would follow my leadership. I need to tell you, I tend to do better leading men who are kind of rough around the edges. I'm not too good with smooth, white-neck people. But I can do pretty well with rough, redneck people. The word was that after all the people left this church, somebody else would have it in 6 months because the people who were left here wouldn't be able to make a payment on it. So y'all look me in the eye. We paid it off early and gave over $1 million to missions. And you don't tell a bunch of old people what they can't do. I don't know if y'all know this little truth or not, but young people know how to spend money. The problem is they don't have any money. Old people are careful with their money, but they got some money. And the quicker we learn that, the better off we're going to be, because when we start telling old people we're going to spend their money, you better make sure they're going to keep it coming, because they can leave you hanging high and dry. We did a lot of things here that were special to me. We did 21 years of going all over this country, building church buildings. And here again, the group of men that would go with me were rough around the edges. They really were. The first trip we took after 9/11, we all got on the plane. The stewardesses were kind of jittery. They didn't know what to expect. I called one over to where I was sitting, and I said, honey, I need to tell you something. You just relax and enjoy this flight. You've never been any safer in your life than you are on this flight. And she said, how can you say that? If you remember, they cut a stewardess's throat with a box cutter and intimidated a plane full of people and took them to their death. I said, I've got 40 men on this flight, and there's not a one of them that won't look at a terrorist and say, buddy, if all you've got's a box cutter, you don't have near enough. Those are the kind of people I would take. And I didn't get a lot of respect. The word was that BT never does anything. While I was running my tail off, getting everything ready, he doesn't do anything. We were going to raise this big old wall in Salem, Oregon, and it was going to take everybody that we had to raise it. We had people up high to catch it and people down low to raise it. And I walked in about the time they were going to do it, and I felt like I wanted to participate in this event. And I walked up and leaned over to get a hold, and somebody up there said, somebody go get a camera. BT's fixing to do something. And I just backed away and stood there, and they were waiting. And they said, what you waiting on, BT? And I said, I really said this. I'm not going to say it like I said it, but I'm just trying to figure out how all of y'all could kiss my rear end at the same time. And I looked around, and the pastor of the church was standing right behind me. I didn't know he was anywhere around. Standing there. And when I saw him, he wheeled and left. He looked like one of those people leaving Central with a diarrhea. Man, he got out of there. We raised the wall. When we got through, I went and found the preacher, and I said, "Preacher, these old boys are pretty rough. They're good as gold. They're spending their money and giving their time to build you a church. And they got the biggest heart anybody I've ever known. But sometimes I have to talk to them in a language they understand." And he said, "I understand, Brother Watley, I understand." So that night, we were eating together, and nobody else was there. And I said, "Men, I embarrassed myself today. I'm not going to do that again. So in the future, if I need to tell you to kiss my rear end, I'm just going to tip my hat to you." The next day, the little ladies brought us refreshments under the covered walkway, and they were sitting over there with all this good food, and they were watching the work take place, and one of the ladies looked at me and said, "Sir, that's the most polite group of men I've ever seen in my life. They pass each other and tip their hats to each other." I said, "Yes, ma'am. They are a very polite group of people." On one of our trips, we were pulling out of the airport in Dallas. We left the gate and got out going toward the runway, and the plane stopped. And we just sat there. And we sat there. And we sat there. I'm getting a little nervous. I mean, we got connections to make, things to do, and we just sitting there. And after a little while, they cut the motors off. And they're not telling us anything. We're just sitting there. "Harold, where are you, boy?" Right there, bless your heart. Harold Bomprezi was sitting right behind me, sitting by Mark Roten, one of our young boys who was with us on the mission trip. And the stewardess came by. And Harold, who is good for 1,000,000 laughs and 1,000,000 hours of good work, I'm telling y'all, Harold stopped her and said, "Go get me something with vodka in it." And Mark Roten said, "Brother Tom's going to hear you." And he said, "I don't care who hears me. I got to have some relief." Harold was kind of claustrophobic, and he was getting closed in. And I understood he wanted something for medicinal purposes. Y'all understand that, don't you? And don't tell me you don't understand it, because there's a lot of you little ladies in here for a long time slept real well taking NyQuil every night, and it was an 80% shot of whiskey is all it was. And you loved it. Made you sleep so good, you know? Well, Harold did a special thing for me, too, on one of our trips to Hawaii. We were on Maui, staying at the Sheraton Maui, and we went to their Polynesian show, and I told Harold that he would really enjoy it. And the lady who was in charge, I found her, and I said, "If you need anybody from the audience," I knew she always did. "See that man right over there? He would do real well." Okay. So when it came that time, she called Harold up on the stage. Now, she was a rather large Hawaiian woman. They get that way the older they get, and she was rather large. And she got Harold up there, and she was going to teach him how to hula. And she started showing him how to move the hands and to move the hips. And old Harold's just doing real well, you know. Then she has him turn around and put his rear end to the audience. And she turns around and is standing beside him. And you remember she's going to teach him how to do around the island. Rosalind can do around the island, I'm telling y'all that right now. But she's going to teach him how to do around the island. And while she was teaching him, she just reached over and put her hand on his butt. And Harold, being the good southern redneck that he was, just reached over and put his hand on her butt. And she jumped and ran like somebody had shot her, and my voice could be heard on the recording. Attaboy, Harold! Y'all hang around him. He is good for that kind of stuff, isn't he? He really is. It's 10 after. What do we need to do? Y'all ready for me to quit? Are you sure? You got to go to the bathroom. You got to come back because we haven't had the offering yet. I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell you a couple of things that I used to do with my staff here at this church. We would always go to the state convention, and it was the most boring stuff you could go to. Sit there through day and afternoon, night, business, listening to reports. And we all took our little notebooks, and we gave awards for which preacher could do the most with the least amount of hair. And you never live till you see preachers parading in with all those hairdos. One year, the boy that won it parted his hair on the back and brought it all forward and made himself some bangs up front, and it looked like he had a full head. The next year, the one who won it had it coming from both directions around this way, and the third year, it was a total wrap. Like a honeycomb. And we would sit back there and grade them, and be a bunch of them on our list, and pick the winner. And these old boys would win something. They probably never won anything in their life, and they won something big and never even knew about it. But it was fun for us to pass the time away. One of my favorite all time is Brad here. Brad? Neil? Yeah. Did Brad not come?
Brad's not here. He had another engagement.
Had another engagement?
Yes.
But I didn't have another engagement. I'm fixing to tell his stories. It was annual physical time, and I was eating with the attorneys. And I told them, I said, you know how you do? You go get your blood work done. Then you got to go back for an appointment with a doctor. And I told him, I said, I got to get my man face on because, well, men have to go through this prostate thing, which is very invasive. And I told him at the table, I said, he's not going to do that to me. I'm telling you right now, I'm not going to let him do it. And I no sooner got away than Rick texted Brad McAnally and said, a man of BT's age needs to have a thorough physical. And I get over there. Sitting out in the waiting room was Dennis and Charlotte Holden. And I sit and chat with them for a while. Finally, they ring my little buzzer, and I go back, and they put me in a room, and I'm sitting in there waiting and waiting. There's not a lot to look at in one of them rooms. Blood pressure thing, and a little sink, and a trash, and this thing that they always have new toilet paper all over, for you to sit on. And I just whiling my time away, and the door opens, and in walks Dennis Holman, dear friend of mine. He's got a rubber glove on one hand. He's got a tube of lubricant in the other hand. And he walks toward me, and I said, Dennis, I love you. Now, this is an all-American football player I'm talking to. Dennis, I love you, but you ain't a man enough to do what you're going to try to do. And they started laughing, and they had people lined up and down the hall waiting, listening to what was going on. And then I learned later that he did the same thing to Larry Black. Is Larry Black here? Bless his heart. He put a white coat on Robert Glenn and sent Robert into Larry Black's room, and Robert said, oh, my name is Robert, I'm the doctor today. And Larry ran, and nobody saw him for 3 weeks. And I'm telling you right now, Larry Black deserved every bit of that. But while we were here, Roz and I were going to go to Hawaii for our anniversary. And we both were sick. And we didn't know whether we ought to try to go or not, because it was just awful to pay that kind of money and fly away to Hawaii and be sick. I mentioned to Brad, and he said, I'll come by after church tonight and give you and Ross a shot and fix you up, okay? I said, would you do that? And he said, yeah. Doctors don't do that, y'all. He came to our house, gave Rosalind a shot, gave me a shot, told us to have a good time. Then he went out to his little paper sack on my table, and he said, I brought you something, BT. And I looked in that sack, and there were 3 little blue pills in there. Three of them. I don't take any medicine, y'all. I take a little blood pressure pill. That's only, every day, I just don't take medicine. Don't need to take any medicine. I've never had any little blue pills. I didn't know what they were. I got to thinking, why would Brad do that? And then it dawned on him, because he's always been a good boy. All of his life. Brad never got into trouble as a teenager. I mean, he needed somebody to get him off and get him in some trouble, because he just didn't know what trouble was like. But he was a good boy. And he was just trying to help. And it dawned on me that those little pills must be for anxiety. And so I put them in my pocket. And before we got on the plane, I took all 3 of them. I slept like a log. Had some weird dreams, but slept like a log. And when you've got a doctor like that, you can't help but feel good all the time. I'm going to let Pam out. We got to quit sometime. I haven't even gotten a third through. Y'all have to do it again. I'll tell you all the rest of my stories. But she's going to introduce you to the offering, but before she does, let me tell you this. I have never done anything like this in my life. Never planned on doing it. Cindy and I talked about it way back one time. It might be something I could do to help the ranch raise some money. And it just materialized this time. But my only reason for doing it are those little girls. They're worth it. The things that you do for your children, most of them never had it done for them. And it thrills my heart to see them be in a place they can call home, even though it's not home, and be loved and cared for. And I want your heart to be tendered at that point. And while we're taking up the offering, I'm going to tell you another story while you're giving your money, okay?
Hey, John, can you push up the lights just a little bit? Does anybody need an envelope? Because if you do, raise your hand and volunteers can get an envelope to you. But I'm going to ask them to go ahead and start taking up the offering. I do want to recognize this group of volunteers as a core group that help us with events every year, sometimes twice a year, and there is no way that we could do it without them, so I appreciate them. And I also want to recognize somebody that you have not seen tonight because he's been upstairs and he does not like attention, unlike Brother Tom. But Will Rushing is the pastor here at Woodward Avenue Baptist Church, and he's actually been confirmed by the Pope. Just want everybody to know that. But Will is up in the balcony tonight running the live stream and the cameras and the videos, and just want to say thank you, Will, for taking the time to do that. Any envelopes needed? Okay, continue.
Am I back on? Neil Isbell. Where are you, Neil? Came home from a vacation. Beautiful green yard. In big block letters in the front of my house, meticulously done by someone who would pick up a push mower and move it, were the giant letters, C Rock City. And people were driving up and down the street to look at it. And the next day I was working in the yard, and Christopher Isbell, Linda and Chigger's little boy, was walking down the street, and I said, Christopher, did you see who did my yard? And he said, yes, sir, I did. I said, who was it? He said, it was Big Neil. And I said, okay. And I'd tell people, and they said, what are you going to do to get even with him? I said, not one thing. It would just get worse. It's a game you don't play with that man. And then, you know what happened? When it finally grew back, it was greener than the rest of my yard. So it was there for the whole year. In this baptistry, I've gotten in there to baptize someone, and a big banner across the inside curtain say, War Eagle. And I ripped that thing down. Put my waders on, tried to, and they were stuffed with newspapers. Not just pushed down, but stuffed with newspapers. Everybody's out here waiting, and I'm trying to get paper out of my waders. And then one time I get in there, and there's no paper, and I feel good, and I'm out in the water waiting, and I feel water running into my wader. He had punched a hole in both sides of my wader. Had his name over the whole thing. Neil Isbell. And because I am so sweet and so precious, I have just loved him in spite of all of his many faults. As a brother that I love really like a brother. Is Rodney Howard here? Rodney? Hot Rod, stand up. Come on, stand up, Hot Rod. Stand up, Rick. Stand up, Rick. Yeah, you. Stand up, Neil. I want you to look at these three men. They are going to do my funeral. I do not want some normal preacher doing my funeral. There's an envelope in my lockbox at the bank with each of their names on it. And when the time comes for my memorial service, they're going to do it. And if they don't do a good job, those envelopes are going to be opened. I call that, Bill, leverage. That's leverage. And y'all look a little nervous right now, by the way. I can't hear, you know that. I love you guys. I want to thank y'all for coming. It's made my day. I've left out some good stuff I wanted to share, but it just takes a while to do this. It really does. I love you. And are we through? Would you let me do something spiritual? I want to pray with y'all. Would you just stand with me right now and let me do that? God, I thank you for giving us a sense of humor. You have one, so it's okay for us to have one. And if people don't believe you have one, then they just need to look in the mirror. Because there's nothing about us that's beautiful except the forgiveness of our sins that comes only through Jesus Christ. And I thank you for an opportunity for us as yours to show that faith. I pray for those young ladies that live at the Fame Girls Ranch. I pray for the people who work with them and help them and enable them. And I pray for the people who support it. And I ask you to continue to give us an opportunity to make a difference in their lives. For it's in the name of Christ that I pray. Amen. And thank you for coming. You're special.